Okay.
All right, welcome everyone to our Saturday evening meeting. For those of you who are new, we meet here every other week from 6 p.m. till 7:30. On opposite Saturdays, we are in Anoka and on Main Street. Wednesday evening meetings are held in St. Cloud on the first and third week of each month. For those meetings in St. Cloud begin at 6:30 p.m. During the first 45 minutes or so, we generally have a speaker discuss the week's topic, and then there is open discussion for the remainder. Everyone is encouraged to bring any resources, experience, or knowledge they may have to share. The success of this group depends heavily on your participation. There is no fee. We ask only that you give what you can, and if you cannot give, please come anyway. Our mission is to provide resources and support to all members of the transgender community, building relationships through fellowship and understanding. Before we begin, let's take a moment to go around and introduce ourselves. If you have preferred pronouns, be sure to mention those as well. I will start. My name is Brianna, so call me Girl Set. We'll go to you, Mike.
My name is Sherry. This is pronouns. Evelyn, she, her. Anna, she, her. Sasha, she, her.
Rosetta, she, her.
Karen, she, her.
Michaela, she, her.
Liz, she, her.
Phil Duran, she, him.
You are outnumbered tonight. Liz, can you introduce Phil for us?
Now, this is why I keep this on. This topic is about insurance and law. We may vary to different areas besides that, but that's the primary topic. This is being recorded because we have a number of people who asked for us to record these and weren't able to make it. So just so you know that that is, and we're only going to be publicly available to hear questions in which you don't want to reveal personal information. Either anonymize the question or wait the last 15 minutes, at which point we'll stop the recording, and then the rest of it will be recorded. So just so you know that that's happening. Also, we have this on WebEx. Nobody's joining on WebEx, but somebody may. We'll also disconnect that for the last 15 minutes too. So in case there's any question that you want to ask, but don't want to have any information that is available outside this room, again, anonymize it or wait for the last 15 minutes. So our guest tonight is Phil Duran, who is the legal director at Park, Minnesota, and who's been graciously volunteered to come and do that. A lot of you already know who he is because he's been a big help and resource to people here in the community, and either directly or indirectly. And I'll let you take from here.
All right, sounds good. So, welcome everybody. I'm so happy to see you. We were trying to the projector on the wall, it really works well, but looks like it's a fantastic screen. If you can't see, feel free to move up, get closer to the front row. I'm not going to pick on you. So, but if you'd rather sit in the back, it's totally fine. I just want to make sure that folks have the ability to see if they wish. For those who don't know, Outfront Minnesota is the largest organization in the state that works for full equality for LGBTQ individuals and their families. We have now been doing this for over 30 years. We're based over the community center at Stafford Community Center, 38th and 3rd Street. Don't try taking 38 tonight. Bam, right into $35. Sorry, but you want it. But we've been in that same building for 30 years as well. Our work is very much statewide, so we do also reach into St. Cloud, Duluth, and Rochester, and all the rest. And we pursue the mission through a combination of direct service, public policy, and education and training. And I'm actually going to be using our website as a bit of it's a little bit of a multi-purpose thing. We've redesigned the website. If you had been to outfront.org within the past couple of months, but not lately, you may have remembered our circa 1995 website, which was great. If you will, to say card capitalized. But it wasn't exactly where the industry is now. And so we've spent some time and money and effort to redo the website. And We've got some really good stuff on there for trans folks. And so I use it for three things. One, this is like a super easy outline for me because it's all online. I just pull it up and there it is. I can use that. The other one is really to help folks make sure that you know that it's there. Whether it's for you or maybe it's your friend or someone that you know at work or at your congregation or something. You say, hey, I was at this program and there's something online about that. Let's see if we can go through some steps and find it. And then the third thing is really it's an opportunity for us to get feedback from people like you to say, this is great, but you could really benefit us by adding this kind of content or something of that sort. So please do feel free to offer feedback and comments on that. I know that, as Liz said, kind of the main event was to talk about some healthcare, health coverage kinds of questions that you may have. A couple things. One is, and I think this may kind of go with some of what Liz was saying earlier about, I'm happy to try to talk about questions, things like that, but use your best judgment about saying, well, this is what happened to me last week, because this is a room full of people and you don't know where that information can go. If you want to have a confidential conversation, let me give you a card, or we'll figure out a way to connect and have a more confidential conversation if you want. But just remember that the walls have ears. Apparently, we're being broadcasted and happening after, so who knows how that works. The other thing is that I've got it up for a while. I've learned to do things, and one of the things is I might say, well, the law is this, or the rules say that, and someone in the back is going to say, I just called someone up and it happened. It was great. So if you have an experience that you wish to share, that you don't feel is confidential, and you like that adds to the thing, feel free to tell you that story. And because that's how people learn. And I know the trans folks are extremely resourceful when it comes to solving problems. And so there are a lot more creative solutions out there that I can help you imagine. But I want to start with just kind of giving a little bit of overview. Maybe I said 2 sentences about it up front, but I just want to point out a couple of things. Now watch, I can't find anything on the website. No, okay, here we go. So we've got tabs across the top. One is called Legal and Trans Justice. And there we go. Look at that. That's the Supreme Court. And we should have, there are now 4 tabs down here, right under the photographs. You won't be able to see them there, but they're your rights, family law, trans law, and health, which is where we're going to wind up, and then schools and the law. Just as a general matter, this kind of apparently comes up automatically on your rights. Just so that you know, Minnesota law provides for protection from discrimination based on both sexual orientation and gender identity. I know we have at least one visitor here from Wisconsin. Wisconsin law only protects explicitly on the basis of sexual orientation. It does not explicitly include gender identity, but that technically neither do we. We tuck gender identity within the definition of sexual orientation. This is a little unusual, and it can get confusing. Bear in mind that happened 25 years ago, and that was kind of that's what needed to happen 25 years ago to get trans people into the Human Rights Act. And so, if, for example, a trans person comes to me and says, I'm discriminated against because I'm trans, I might say, okay, great, let's talk about a sexual orientation discrimination case. And they look at me like, did you not hear me? I'm not talking about my sexual orientation. I'm talking about my gender identity. I'm like, yeah, I know. But this is what we have to do to fix that problem. And so just understand, if you look up Minnesota law somewhere, and up on sexual orientation, trans people are included within that, even though it seems counterintuitive. So, the Minnesota Human Rights Act applies to most of the pretty routine interactions that we might have in the course of our life. So, workplace, schools, what are called public accommodations, which is a private space, but which is held open for use by the public. Examples like your restaurant, the Mall of America, a movie theater. Those are what are called public accommodations. What are called public services. So anything provided by any level of government anywhere in Minnesota, with the exception of the federal government. Federal government can't be bound by state law. But if it's something that's provided by the state of Minnesota, by a county, by a city, or a township, or a school board, or a public library, or something of that sort, the Human Rights Act applies to all of that. Business, contracting, if someone says, I don't want to enter into a contract with somebody because of LGBT or for other reasons, similar kinds of things. No, can't do that either. Housing, so renting an apartment, buying a house, things of that sort, are all covered under the Minnesota Human Rights Act. Now, there's kind of a workaround for people like Sherry and others who may be in Wisconsin or one of the Dakotas, where you don't have a state law that bars discrimination based on gender identity. And it's a somewhat more creative use of federal law. I mean, I've heard stories about this that have been circulating on the internet because they're so often the case and everything else. In the past several years, federal law that talks about sex discrimination has been interpreted fairly broadly to include discriminating against somebody because they're trans. And the idea is, in my words, you can't really even describe a trans person without having to refer somewhere to sex in the concept, in the male-female kind of context. Otherwise, if you can't use that concept, it's very hard to describe. So the courts have begun to realize that, yes, if you discriminate against somebody because they transition or because they live outside of what's typically expected of a man or a woman, that's sex discrimination, and so the courts have tended to recognize that is trans. So if you're in Wisconsin, you're in one of the Dakotas, and you don't have a state law like the Minnesota Human Rights Act that bars discrimination against trans people, you may have something under federal law. It may be that option. So it's something to bear in mind. That whole conversation, we'll come back to it because it does come back into healthcare in a couple of different ways. So hold on to that thought. There are some exceptions to the Human Rights Act that you should just be aware of. We're sitting in the middle of one of them. Most times, religious institutions are not going to be covered, are not going to be bound by the Human Rights Act provisions regarding sexual orientation. So, if a church, I just had an inquiry with somebody who had been offered a volunteer opportunity in the congregation, and they were trans or gender non-conforming, some of the other folks in the congregation didn't like that, they were racist, and whoever it was, the church board, said, maybe you shouldn't do that. And is that discrimination? Yeah, it is discrimination. Is it permissible under the Minnesota Human Rights Act? It is, unfortunately. It's one of the trade-offs that were made 25 years ago to get things through. It's also a function of the First Amendment and the freedom of religion, and we can like that or not like that, but that's kind of the lay of the land at the moment. There are some tricky rules around duplexes. If it's an owner-occupied duplex, they do not have to rent the other half to somebody who's LGBT. There are a couple of other.
Can I not rent to cis people then?
No, it's interesting. No, it's a good question because it's a variation on a theme that you. But yes, I believe the answer is yes. You probably could. Please don't. But we had this question come up that one of the areas that's accepted is private, nonprofit, youth-serving organizations. So, like children's theater company, I assume is a private nonprofit. And hypothetically, they would be allowed to discriminate based on sexual orientation when it comes to volunteers or staff. But they cannot refuse service or participation to LGBT kids. If kids are trying out for a play or something like that, they couldn't. And I'm just using them as an example. Don't get up my arms out. But they might say, we don't want a gay man directing this play, and that would be permissible. They couldn't say, we don't want that lesbian girl in high school to play the role in that play. That would, because she's lesbian, that would be a problem. So, hypothetically, yes, I think if you own a duplex and you lived in it, you could discriminate based on sexual orientation and kick my ass. So, anyway, just bear that in mind. What did you learn on Saturday night? Okay. Right. So, your rights in Minnesota are protected in a variety of ways. If you experience some kind of discrimination in the city of Minneapolis or the city of St. Paul, both cities have their own local ordinances. and they each have their own department of civil rights in Minneapolis, human rights in St. Paul, that can take complaints and investigate matters and resolve those. You can also file a complaint anywhere in the state of Minnesota with the Minnesota Department of Human Rights. Yes.
Do St. Paul and Minneapolis go above and beyond what the state covers?
Sure. Do you need me to repeat questions? Are you recording? Is that the deal?
It's fine for the microphone over there.
Oh, okay. So in case it doesn't pick up, the question was, does Minneapolis St. Paul go beyond? Yes, in some ways. It's kind of murky, right? I remember one time, a number of years ago, we had a case where there was a lesbian woman who had a child. She was in a relationship with another woman. It was an abusive relationship. She and the child showed up at the local shelter, which provides a shelter for women and children who are fleeing domestic abuse. Seems like kind of a good fit, but unfortunately, it was not a good fit because the thing was run by a religious organization, and when they found out that her abuser was another woman, they said, out you go. The St. Paul Department of Human Rights actually went there because they didn't have some of the specific housing-related exceptions that the state law does, and they got them on that, which was great. There's some question about whether cities can go beyond what the state has enacted, but it's a possibility.
Sorry, this was at 6:30.
I did. No, that's right. Welcome. Glad you're here. Hang on just a second. But you're next. So yes, so the local ordinances don't have some of the same exceptions the state law does, and so we've been able to use those on occasion. Back before marriage came into play, Minneapolis went so far as to amend their civil rights ordinance to bar discrimination against registered domestic partners, so that if there was a Rochester Athletic Club. They used to only offer, they had a county membership, and it was only offered to married couples. And our clients were unmarried at that time by law. They couldn't be married, lesbian couples, and they were denied the family membership because they were married. Lost. There you go. And if that had happened in Minneapolis under this ordinance, they might have had a claim. So Minneapolis went a little bit further than the state law, but again, there is a deeper question about exactly how much further cities can actually go than the state in this area. And you're seeing the same kinds of questions come up with regard to the $15 an hour minimum wage and the sick time, for the sick time ordinance. Again, they're amending this, the employer-employee relationship in ordinance. Can they do that? Can they exceed what the state does? And the answers are sort of beginning to go yes. So that's a good awesome outcome for us. So it may allow cities to do some more in areas of this, but it's a little tricky. Yeah.
There's been an effort not to insult religious people and you blame the church rather than.
Yes. Fair enough.
I'm pretty sure he would.
Right, because there are very good people of all faiths that are impacting. Here we go. So we're in one of those places. So thank God. And I stand corrected. I should know that. So if you have issues with some of the stuff in the state, in the local areas, you can do this. If you have a federal discrimination complaint, there is typically going to be a federal agency that enforces that. So the obvious example would be if you have a workplace issue and you're pursuing it under federal law, and we'll talk about some specific examples related to healthcare. You can go to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and you can go see and file a complaint with the federal government. With the state and local stuff, if it happens in Minnesota, you can also just go right to court. You don't have to go through the agency. That is, you have to start with the agency and then go to court. So, but you've got a bunch of stuff here that you can access. The other tab that's really going to be, I think, fairly helpful for us is this whole thing about, actually I'm going to skip over here to schools just real quick, just so that you know it exists. If you are working with any kind of youth, trans youth, we do have a fair amount of resources on here about gender inclusion policies that more and more school districts are considering right now. The Minnesota Department of Education has developed last summer what they call a toolkit for including transgender non-conforming kids within schools, within school programs and activities. It is just a set of recommendations. Minnesota Department of Education is actually relatively limited in terms of what it can actually make school districts do, because each is independently governed. But this is the set of recommendations that are there. If you may recall, it's been about 3 years, it's hard to believe, but the Minnesota State High School League had a whole big, volcanic explosion a couple of years ago about what do we do with trans kids trying to play sports and blah, blah, blah. So it's all here. Title IX is the federal law that bars sex discrimination in education. And it's that same concept I mentioned earlier about sex discrimination being interpreted very broadly. This is still a tool, regardless of the things that are going on right now in Washington. Title IX is still there for trans kids and others who are in educational settings. And so it's still there. And then there are just some crazy things that go on with respect to trans people and selective service and financial aid. If you know any trans people in kind of college age, in that age group, they may have run into some of this stuff. As you may recall, back in the Reagan years, as I recall, Selective Service Administration created, if you are a male, you have 30 days to register from the 18th birthday to register with Selective Service. And you have to register between your 18 and 26. If you don't do that and you're supposed to, you may not qualify for financial aid. Well, if you were at age 18, if you were living as a girl, and now your documents all read male, and you fill out your college application saying, yes, my name is Tom, and I'm a boy, or a man, and I'm applying for college and financial aid and all that kind of stuff, they're going to look up Tom in their records and say, Tom, you registered for selective service, so tough luck, I need to get financial aid. Flip it around. If you were born Tom and now you're 18, 19, and you are living as a woman, you're applying and filling out their forms, all my documents say that, blah, blah, blah. Selective Service doesn't care. They go by what was on your birth certificate on day one. And if there was an M on your birth certificate on day one, you're supposed to register. Trick question, if you go to register and you say you're female, it kicks it out saying you're not allowed to register. So Selective Service tells the young trans woman, you're not allowed to register if you're a woman. You were supposed to register because you're a man. Oh, sorry. This is just a big screwy nightmare. There are ways around it. There are workarounds. They're far from perfect, but there are. So if you know younger trans folks who are struggling with this, there are workarounds. There are people who have navigated this, and just so you know that it's there.
Well, you're in the education section here. This is something that I stumbled across on an online discussion several months ago. I think you and I talked about this. Going back and changing your school records post-transition, which I understand some people do. And it's like, wow, I never even thought of that.
Yes.
Has that been anything that you, and is that a difficult thing to do? Yes.
It probably is, just because they think once you've graduated, these records are done. They're not living documents, in essence. We worked with a trans man a number of years ago, and he'd gone to school out in the suburbs. And at this point, he was middle-aged, so let's call him 50, I don't really know. He'd gotten laid off from his job as an economic thing, and he decided to go back to school. And so he's applying to wherever he's going and saying he'd like their high school transcript. Because, my grades 30 years ago, super crucial to this job, or to this thing. And so for him, his identity as a trans man was deeply personal. And he absolutely did not want this to happen. And yet, all of his records from that school district had a girl's name, and in fact, stapled to them was a picture of a girl. And he was hamstered, you know what to do. Why is it? And what we ended up doing was using a statute called the Minnesota Government Data Practices Act. And it's a little bit like FOIA, Freedom of Information Act at the federal level. And what we went back to the school district and said, look, when you created this kid's file 4 or 5 years ago, whatever it was, you were probably using the kid's birth certificate. Here's the court order saying the birth certificate was wrong and ordering it changed. So it sounds like your records are based on some wrong information. You didn't mean for that to happen. You had no reason to know when this kid was 5 that this would come up. But here's what's happening, and it's really no skin off your nose, is it? And so since you are a government entity and you are holding data on our client, and it is wrong, he challenges it, and there's absolutely no harm in fixing this. And they agree. And they created a clean record, took the girl's picture off, and he got a transcript with, you know, his correct name on it, and he was able to apply to school and get in, off you go. And so he wasn't out of them. It would, I think that's going to work if it's a public school. If it's a private school, it would, I'm sure we could find some ways, but it's just tricky. In the sense that part of what you're trying to do is to, with the private school, if you're trying to use the Human Rights Act and say you're treating me different than you would treat that other kid, well, how many kids really are going there? And who are you comparing yourself to? If you just say, we don't change records at all, everybody's getting treated the same way. So maybe it's not a discrimination issue, so how else can you get there? Government Data Practices Act at least gives you a way in with regard to public schools, potentially including U of M and NSU, all that kind of thing. So, yeah.
So, is changing your birth certificate, gender marker, and name, is that probably the best first step, and then you can leverage that?
Well, let's just hit a different tab, shall we? Trans law and health. Woo! So, this is where a lot of this stuff is going to be Minnesota specific. In that person's case, at that time, there really wasn't an administrative method to change birth certificates. Now there is. And the only thing you could do was go to court and get a judge to apply Minnesota statute 144.218 that says this birth certificate is incomplete, inaccurate, or false. And so we were able to say, in that case, back to the school district, say, look, here's a judge in your county that said, this person's record is incomplete, inaccurate, or false. This is probably what you use. So, therefore, your records are incomplete, inaccurate, or false. We want them fixed. And they back out. So, at this point, you wouldn't necessarily have a court order. We'll come back to that. But if you showed that, yes, in fact, I updated my record because blah, 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 you might still be able to get it. A court order would be great, even more persuasive if you wanted to fight that way.
Bill, isn't it state of origin as far as the placeholder and the receipt of all this stuff?
Depends. Were you born in
South
Dakota? Okay. So the nice thing is that last I checked, there were only three states that were just like, we're not changing birth certificates. And I think it was Tennessee, Ohio, and Idaho. I think that's Idaho. And I think Ohio has begun to come down off the ledge. So that's good. So we may be down to 2 that are just like not going to happen. And I'm not even sure if those 2 are still there, but that was the case not that long ago. What that means is that there are 47 or 48 states, obviously DC, that will do this. Then it's a question of,
can the name be changed on that birth certificate?
Typically, yes. Typically, yes. So then you're going to want to check back with, say, in your case, South Dakota, and say, what do you need? Some states demand a quarter, some states want to see proof of surgery, some states don't care. Minnesota no longer cares about any of that stuff, which is cool. But it does create some issues. What is very typically true is that all states recognize that people move around. I move. My birth certificate's in Michigan. If I needed to change that thing, there's not really a court in Michigan that has jurisdiction over me. I mean, I might be able to go to Camden County where Health Department presumably is located right in there, but it doesn't make any sense. And so most states are willing to take orders from what they call courts of competent jurisdiction. So in other words, I'm a Hennepin County resident. I got an order from Hennepin County that does whatever. They would take it in Michigan. They'll just say, fine. Because they know it's going to go back the same way. So there's someone that was born in Minnesota who now lives there, and they want, so we all have to get along. And so probably, if, for example, for a court order, they would take a Minnesota court order. So you want to double check that, want to double check what their standards are. And just kind of take it from there. But you're right. And we have on our birth certificate page, and I know we have a question. On our birth certificate page, there is a link on here someplace to, here we go. It's a page on the Lambda Legal website, and it is a table. There we go. It's a state-by-state table of all the different things that different places. So let's pick a state just at random. How about South Dakota? Just for kicks. See what comes up on South Dakota. Nothing. South Dakota, we lost them. Never mind. Well, apparently, normally, the website would work. But there is a tab for South Dakota, and I don't know why it's not working.
Sometimes the touchscreen doesn't work. It's mousy.
Okay. Well, in any event, you can get to this page. It's on the Lambda League website. It's also, I think I broke it. Because now it's not going down. See, it's going on. Right, and it's not going back, right? So you can get this. So you can look up and see what is South Dakota, what is Iowa, or Nebraska, and figure out. So if it's a court order, it's almost invaluable to get a court order here. And put another, shoot another foot. Minnesota judges, oh, look, something works. So thank you. Minnesota judges, they'll do orders to Wisconsin, or believe it or not, there's some sort of a nest of trans people in Ramsey County that are all from Texas. I don't understand. But, well, yeah, but St. Paul. I didn't go to this one, but okay. So let's see, administrative code. It looks like they look for a court order. Yeah, so that's all it says. They look for a court order. It doesn't appear to involve surgery or any of that kind of crap. So if you get a court order from Hennepin County or Ramsey, wherever you are, it should be adequate.
Yeah. Let's say I was born in California, that'll change it for $11 in doctor's note.
Sweet.
But the question that I have is I'm moving forward with things like applying for surgeries and name change and things like that. I've been getting primary care for the last few years from a nurse practitioner, and all of these places say we require a note from a doctor, somebody with an MD or a PhD.
To do what?
To count as
for the birth certificate?
For the birth certificate,
Okay.
or for getting letters claiming I'm competent to get surgery and all that jazz.
Okay.
And I'm curious whether I've been kneecapping myself by going to a nurse practitioner, or whether there's some sort of system whereby she writes the letter and it gets signed off by an MD in her clinic, or whether I need to start seeing a physician.
I would guess that there is a workaround, that there are doctors that your nurse practitioner may have a recommendation, that they may have a relationship with a doctor who they'd be able to say, here's my file on this person, here's my record, what do you think? The only question that comes to mind off the top is, would the doctor involved feel a need to create a doctor-client or doctor-patient relationship? So maybe they see you once, and they go over with you, and they say, I'm satisfied, and they sign it. There was a doctor in town a couple years ago. He can find out even feel this, right? And it's great on one level because it really helped a lot of people, but as a lawyer, you're like, I need to go to court with this thing. Like, crazy. And that got a little complicated. But there's probably a workaround. I would talk to your nurse practitioner about that and just see what they can do to connect you with somebody who's good. There's also the Trans Health Coalition, and I don't know if you're familiar with them, connected with them at all. They have a list on their website of practitioners, people who are very trans competent, who might be able to say, oh yeah, come on down. So there's solutions.
I like your idea of seeing an MD anyway. So what I found for me to claim on health insurance is I needed a letter from a licensed psychologist and also from an MD. Yeah. And you did those two letters together, and at least for my insurance, that was necessary and sufficient. They both need to, and the doctor needs to diagnose you as trans. And I think one consult would probably do it. But
So it sounds like a hoop, but not necessarily an insurmountable goal.
Yes. When you're petitioning for a name change, is it better to ask for a new birth certificate or just overwrite your old one?
If you're going into court, the law changed in this relatively recently to make it a lot easier. So first of all, you go to the court in the county of your residence. You need to have lived in Minnesota for 6 months. You need to go in with 2 witnesses who know you. If you're in Hennepin County, they can come up with some crap. They need to have known you for a year. There's nothing anywhere in law that requires that, but whatever. You go in and have a quick hearing. And typically, 99.9% of the time, you can name it. It's fine. On the adult forms, there are separate forms for adults and for minors because the legal standards are different. Typically, I just, in my stuff, I usually just focus on the adults, but it's the paperwork you can access the paperwork all on the website. On the adult forms, there is a place on there now where you can say, and change my sex from this to that. So you can roll it all into one, but you don't have to do it that way. If you just
specifically for changing the person.
Yep. And if you just change your name, you are automatically eligible for an updated birth certificate. So you used to have to do this crap, and you used to have to be. This is so stupid. Oh my god. So we have a client by the name of legal name of John Smith, and John does transition to Jane. John goes in with documentation from the doctor, and the judge says, "Great, I changed your name, John. You're now Jane, and I ordered the birth certificate changed, and the M is now an F." Great. So you haul all that off to the Minnesota Department of Health, which is they're the ones who run birth certificates. And they'd say, well, great, the court order tells us to change the M to the F, which we're totally happy to do. But the order doesn't tell us to change John to Jane, so we can't do that. So, sure, John, we'll happily give you a birth certificate that says John is a woman. That's great, not a problem. Oddly, this is not, satisfactory. And so the law is now different that if you get a name change, automatically health department will issue a new birth certificate with that correct name. If you're born in Minnesota, yes, exactly. You can now bypass the court option if you wish to change the gender marker. You can just do that administratively through the Department of Health with kind of that same doctor letter. We refer to it as an ACT letter, and that's described at the bottom of this page. ACT is the acronym for appropriate clinical treatment, and this is the magic phrase. It came out of, my recollection is it came out of the State Department during the Hillary Clinton era, and it has now kind of become the standard for most things Minnesotans would need. So this, if you get a doctor that says, yes, this is my patient, they have had appropriate clinical treatment for gender dysphoria, they don't have to specify what that treatment is, hormone surgery, whatever. And it's just appropriate clinical treatment. That opens the door for your Minnesota birth certificate to be changed administratively by the health department, opens the door for your driver's license to be changed by Driver and Vehicle Services. It's enough to get your passport changed, social security records, immigration papers if you have them.
It is enough for those last ones? I was glad.
Yep. So it's kind of a little bit of a gold standard. It does have to come from a doctor, to your question. But it opens up the doors, at least for Minnesota. Now, that doesn't necessarily change everything for a Wisconsin birth certificate or a South Dakota. They may take it, I just don't know. But in Minnesota, they will do it administratively. Sadly, it's not for 11 months. It's a little bit more, but not that much. So you can do all that on the birth certificate. Name changes, pretty straightforward in Minnesota, and we've already kind of covered those. Oh my gosh, what's going on? Driver's licenses, it explains the policies that are there. Again, the ACT letter, you just take it in. One of the questions that is starting to come up now, and I don't know if this is of interest to you or some of the folks that you have worked with, but the questions come up about birth certificates and driver's licenses and about whether you can get something that's gender neutral, something that's non-binary. And the short answer is kind of, which is great. In Minnesota, there have been a couple of people who have been successfully worked with them to get them through, and it happens. It's still kind of a process that's being kind of worked out. There's still some things, nothing deadly. But oddly enough, Minnesota law does not require that your sex be listed on your birth certificate. And so we have gotten a couple of court orders that says, great, then just take it off. And we've gotten at least one through the Department of Health administratively as well, just, kind of bantering. So that they produce a birth certificate that says, Mary Smith, father, mother, blah, 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 whatever, date of birth, nothing about sex on there anymore. And so that's nice in the sense that there's nothing ever you have to change at that point. If someone decides at this point in their life they're not binary, but down the road they're like, no, actually, they don't have to change it because it's not even on there in the first place. With regard to driver's licenses, if you've been following that whole midlife lunacy, who knows? But the theory is, when all of that settles down, Midlars, by the way, for Sherry's firm, is Minnesota licensing and registration system. It's this super duper going to be really easy to use computer system to renew your driver's license, your cabs, all that kind of thing. It's going to be perfect. Sweet. They're like tens of millions of dollars of this thing. It's not working, which is crazy. But the theory is that once that settles down, they are going to be able and willing, depending on who's governor next year, to issue driver's licenses that say X instead of an M or an F. The reason for that is that there's a federal law that kicks in. It's called the Real ID Act. You've also been hearing about this. This is the one that's like, oh my God, if we don't do this thing, we'll never get on a plane again. And the Real ID Act is the one that says if you want to use your CID for federal purposes, it has to contain certain things. And one of the things that it has to contain is gender, not sex, but gender. And the feds have said for 10 years plus, we're leaving it up to the states to figure out what you want to put there. And so DC and Oregon are doing X licenses, and Minnesota is willing to do those as well. Once all this craziness with the database thing settles down, we work with driver vehicle services to make sure that the capacity is there to do that.
But how about passports?
Passports is a good question. There is a lawsuit going on right now in the District Court of Colorado, and the last name I believe is Zim. I can't think of the person's first name. Zim is somebody who has ZZYMM, I believe. I think maybe the first name is Dana, but I'm not sure about that. And I think it's Dana, is somebody who identifies as intersex. And they filed a suit against, well, first it was John Kerry, so I guess now it's Rex Tillerson, seeking an X passport. And I have not heard a lot on that lately, but it got traction. And the weird part is it got traction because 70 years ago, after World War II, some internet folks got together and said, like, we want to kind of rationalize what people's passports look like, so that if someone shows up in Brazil with a passport from India, the information is consistent, and so I'm like, okay, I know where to find stuff, and it's all kind of one big standard. And they actually included in that convention 70 years ago talking about X. If it's undetermined or unsure or something like that. So it's been buried there for 70 years. And this is kind of why X plus X just hot. That's, mobile. And so it's starting to come up in some of these areas. So keep an eye on this, but there are some possibilities. Immigration documents, we talked a little bit about that. Passport, Social Security is all there. I know no one wants to talk about restaurants, so let's not do that. Switch over to health coverage, because I think that's what they're actually paying the big bucks to come in and do. We have what I hope is a very good page on our website about health coverage. Yes?
Just one last question about the X.
Okay.
Is it, I know we're talking about this in some areas in the president, but is it wise to have that if you maybe are traveling to less progressive country?
So you read
that would be potentially a passport issue as opposed to driver's license.
Yeah.
And so you can, obviously all of these are optional. If you don't want to get this, you don't have to. But yes, and one of the things that we are talking to folks about is saying, look, if you get this, gender neutral birth certificate or an X license at some point, good luck. I mean, you're on that. I mean, play that flippantly, but you're on the frontier. You might encounter people who have no idea what to do with this thing. You go to cash a check, and they say, X. Hey, Mary, give me a look at this thing. Who knows? So there are a lot of unanswered questions. the better, I think the solution that Minnesota has come up with regard to diversity ratings is really ultimately the better answer. Why do we need a document issued by the government that says, oh, this one has a penis? Perfect. Because, if you really need to know, I can tell you, but...
So we know the draft.
Right, exactly, because I get signed for the draft. And I'm just going to go off on this a little bit. Because 35, whatever it was, going on 40 years ago when that was passed, women could do almost none of the military roles that men did. That has so fundamentally changed. People challenge the constitutionality of the Selective Service Act because this discriminates the basis of sex. You can't really do that. And the Supreme Court upheld it and said, well, they can't really do a lot of military, so whatever, we'll work it out. Well, now they can. And so I think it's right for a challenge. And I can see Ruth Bader Ginsburg just kind of like diving into that one. It's also pointless because if you want a database of young men, 18 to 26, hey, here's a thought. Run it through Social Security. You've got a database with all of that information in it. We got to sign up for it. So, like I said, but so that's just me. This page is intended for a lot of different audiences. So it could be for trans folks, it could be for people who are doing research, it could be for policymakers. So it starts off with what we think is just sort of a very basic primer on gender dysphoria, what's going on here, what does care often look like. There's a link to the standards of care. And we know that the standards of care are tricky. Some people love them, some people don't love them. Gotcha. I will tell you as a lawyer, there are times when I love those things to death. I can use them to advocate for my client. I also know there are times when it feels very painful and regulatory and hoop jumping and all that. So I get that. I respect that. But the document is there. We have a really good run, quite frankly, of success. In breaking down what I call sort of the first generation barriers to trans healthcare. Now we're on to the second generation, because no good deed goes unpunished. But in 2012, we filed a discrimination claim against the University of Minnesota. Our client was a young trans woman who was a student there. She was enrolled. The university, like many, says if you come here, you have to have health coverage. We don't care if you bring it, you're on your parents' policy, not our problem. But you have to have health coverage of some sort. If you don't, we're going to enroll you in this thing called the Student Health Benefit Plan. And at that time, the Student Health Benefit Plan excluded coverage for particularly surgeries, but kind of a lot of it around transition. And so we filed a complaint on her behalf against the university with the Department of Human Rights, and they feedback and said, yeah, you're right, when you exclude transition care from the scope of this insurance plan, that violates the Minnesota Human Rights Act, which is sweet. And so that's great. The exclusion that was there went away. About 3 years afterwards, the Departments of Commerce, Minnesota Departments of Commerce and Health, which each have regulatory authority over a lot of different kinds of health insurance, issued a bulletin to private health insurers in Minnesota. If you're selling health care or health coverage in Minnesota, you can't have these exclusions in your plans. So this is like individual plans. You call up Medica, hey, can you sell me a plan? Or you are part of a small group at work and a boss called up Blue Cross Minnesota and says, hey, sell us a plan. That plan can now not have exclusions in it related to transition.
Well, but there's a lot of things in transition.
Yes.
That means everything you would do.
I'm back. Put that whole back to that.
Okay.
Yep, good question. And so that's been useful. We put both of those together with a couple of other things. You may know that we filed this, Upper Minnesota filed a lawsuit where we were, oddly enough, we were one of the plaintiffs. It's not typical for us. But we sued the state of Minnesota, Emily Johnson Piper, Commissioner of Human Services. Piper, there we go. We should know this. And we sued them and said that the law that was in place at the time, and which is still on the books, if you literally open the books up, that says you can't use your medical assistance or Minnesota care coverage for what they term sex reassignment surgery. We challenged that as a violation of the Minnesota Constitution. We won that case, and there was a judge in Branson County that struck it down and said, no, this is basically just very discriminatory. You can't do this. There's no rational basis for it at all. And the state did not appeal that ruling, which is very helpful. Which means that as of that point, MA in Minnesota and Minnesota Care now do cover a fair amount of stuff. This kind of goes to your question, but I also want to talk more about that. You can read the decision on our website as well, but we have a link to a page on the Minnesota Department of Human Services website that talks about what is covered. And so you go through, and yeah, it's not just sort of the standard sorts of top and bottom stuff, but they do have, they have breast augmentation, they have a variety of other things that are in there so you can see. I wanted to highlight for you the non-covered services. There are a variety of things that are on here that, a lot of things that might be considered facial feminization surgery, for example, that they say are not covered. As far as I'm concerned, I'm going to use a kind of a complicated legal term, and I'm sorry to do this. I think this list is bullshit. So that would be the legal term. So I don't want to talk over your head. I'm sorry. It happens. I use jargon. But I think that this list is entirely made up. And so if you've got somebody who wants one of those things, that's stuff. Really? Yeah. And they also have an exclusion or they limit surgery coverage to people who are 18 or older. And most forms of surgery are limited to people who are 18 or over, at least under the WPATH standards, which they're not law, but they're very influential. But the standards do allow for HOP surgery for some younger trans docs, so like 16, 17. They can do, the WPATH standards provide for that. It's cautious, they don't want to do too much, but, and you understand why, but there you go. They have a surgery requirement of 18, and so I would, the 16 or 17-year-old trans guy that say, I want to do this. Are they on MA or Minnesota Care?
They're on Blue Cross, but
it's
still restricted to.
But is it Blue Plus? Because that's an MA plan.
No, it's through Massachusetts.
I don't even know where that is. Anyway, well, there may be some things that are possible. So anyway, you'll find that there's a very good resource on the website, and check it out. It still comes up. I had a call within probably the past month, not a call, but an email from a social worker I know in Mayo who was working with somebody, and they have some kind of plan out there in greater Minnesota, something rural, and say it was hard, and they were saying, yeah, Medicaid doesn't cover this surgery, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, actually, here's the link, just show it to them. Last I ever heard them. So sometimes it does take a while for the word to get out. So if you're on MA, Minnesota Care, or even insurance, and they say, no, that may not be the end of the story, it may be worth having a conversation and see what we can do. We can't fix every problem.
You may want to cover it, but my company, Excel, is self-insured. So they were exempt, I think, from requirement to check some surgery.
Are they still excluded?
No, I have filed the U.S. complaint to General Justice.
Very good.
Lawsuit. And
So is that a loophole that if they're self-insured, they need not?
Yes, but what you're saying is the way to go. And we've done them too. We've done them, General Justice has done them. So it's out there. And we've actually got some stuff on the website about that. There is in fact, there's a whole paragraph here about employer plans. It's the self-funded ones. If it's your employer is a small one, they just call it benefit, say, hey, it sells a plan, we got that one. But if they're self-insured, there's a law out there called ERISA. It's the Employee Retirement Income Security Act of 1974. And 45 years ago, what happened was you had companies like Excel or Target or whoever saying, look, we operate in 50 states. We've got employees all over the country. We want to offer health plans. It drives us nuts. We cannot conceivably follow the requirements of 50 separate state regulators, and it's our money, and this is nuts. And so Congress responded by saying, okay, fine. If you're self-insured, if you, the employer, are collecting a bunch of money from your staff and putting it in your own and blah, 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 and you're saying, great, we're going to use this to pay bills, and we simply hire Blue Cross or America or whoever to just do the paperwork because we don't know how to do all that stuff. You are not subject to state regulation in virtually all cases. You're subject to federal regulation. And so this I'm not sure if you were here at the very beginning, but we had talked a little bit about how federal law, where it says thou shalt not discriminate on the basis of sex, has been interpreted broadly to include trans folks. This is exactly where one of the implications has been. And so federal law, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 bars discrimination based on sex. Okay, it's federal law, sex includes trans folks, which means if you're a big employer, you're subject to Title VII. This is the employment section of the Civil Rights Act. You can't discriminate on the basis of sex, can't discriminate against somebody because they're trans. And if you, the employer, offer a health plan that has the exclusion, this is exactly what we did in university under state law, because it was a student plan, not an employer plan. It didn't have anything to do with this. EEOC has come back and said, yes, when you exclude transition-related services from that kind of a self-insured plan, that is a Title VII violation. And we have an example of one of the decisions. I don't think it's that one. I think it's Tovar. I forget which one we put up there. But yeah, so we have an example of an EEOC complaint where they come back and say, can't do this. And what we've also been successful, I suspect General Justice is as well, is we just, we start with a letter. And we start with a letter that says, we do this. And maybe you want to think twice. And sometimes they are backing down. And this worries me because I think that's the wrong. Oh no, I get it. The thing that is the decision. There's a wrinkle in that you can get there if it's an employee, but not if it's a dependent. This is the case from the university, which is also not the one I thought it was going to be, which is great. Tovar was a case where mom worked for Essentia Health up north, and she wasn't trans. It was her kid that was trans. The kid's like 10 or something, and needed some kind of services around that were excluded from the plan. She filed a Title VII complaint. It eventually goes all the way up to the 8th Circuit, which is the federal appellate court for our part of the country. And the 8th Circuit said Title VII only protects employees. It doesn't protect their dependents. And so the kid lost, although a trans employee of Essentia probably would have won on exactly the same issue. So there is a tricky wrinkle, and I think I've cut you off several times. So now I'm going to do you. What have I stopped you from asking?
I'm sorry.
There, I know. That was my plan. That was really the planning part.
EEOC did also file something that's inside. I can't remember the statute that said this violates as well.
Yeah,
even though it was something itself.
Right. It's a pretty standard. It's pretty standard practice if you file with the EEOC that they will, I think they call it cross filing with the Minnesota Department of Human Rights. The Department of Human Rights in a situation like that wouldn't have jurisdiction. It's kind of more of just a heads up kind of a situation. So, yeah, so that's the, well. I can't believe it. There's something I forgot to put up here. Goodness. Anyway, okay, so that area is still the one tricky one, because the word hasn't gotten out there. The Affordable Care Act has the potential to really kind of force open a lot of these doors, but that is a mess right now. It's absolutely a mess right now. The good stuff are the federal regs that were actually issued under the Obama administration. I think they came out in May of 16. I think that's right. And then on December 31st, they were supposed to come into effect 1/1/17. On December 31st, 16, on New Year's Eve, a Texas judge special came into the office just to say, no, we're not going to have that happen. And I believe that that's still on judicial hold at this point. So it's very murky. The ACA is still there. And again, it picks up this theme of sex discrimination includes trans people, and so anything the ACA does includes trans folks. And so, the fact that the ACA says you can't be mistreated and you go to the hospital because you're trans, it's still there. And in fact, Gender Justice had a very high-profile case against Fairview. That was on the front page maybe about 2 years ago with a young trans man. It was brutal what he experienced. And so the ACA is still there, but people been through a little bit in the ACA. Yeah, that's yourself.
I had a question about, treatments that are covered or not covered, transition related or not covered. My wife is currently seeking a treatment and was told it was not covered, but that she could submit a letter for individual exemption. Do those ever work?
Yeah, sure. It could. Is there an argument that it's medically necessary? Well, if this is personal, maybe we should talk offline. Okay. But if there is an argument that it's medically necessary under WPATH, there could be a way forward. Okay. That's particularly if it is a state-regulated plan. So if it's a self-insured plan, if it's something like that, if it's an EEOC Title VII stuff, that gets a little trickier. But particularly if it's state-regulated, there may very well be an option. If you want to read the bulletin, a couple things. In fact, on this point, we have a redacted copy of a review that was done for the Department of Commerce. They contract this stuff out. So if you have a dispute with your state-regulated plan, you can go to the Department of Commerce and file what's called an external review. And they contract these things out. They don't do them. And one of their contractors is something called Maximus. And so this is an example of one. It involved a trans man who was looking for top surgery. And the plan that he was on said, well, yeah, you can do this, but here are the hoops you have to jump in and made him up. And so the commerce reviewer came back and said, you can't make those things up. You have to file a WPATH, in which case our person won. And so that's kind of why I'm answering your question that way. If you can tie back WPATH and it's a state plan, you probably have a clean path there. But that, I don't know. The more that a person can say, this is necessary, the better kind of a case you're going to have. There are no guarantees in life, unfortunately. Anything in MNsure should be trans-inclusive. So if you're going through MNsure, getting any plan there, should be okay. Didn't always used to be that way. If you are, there's actually some really good information that we just posted. This is on the federal website, which, again, in Trump's America, it's amazing that it's still there. But healthcare.gov does have a whole page of stuff on trans healthcare and ways to get in. The Minnesota AIDS Project has LGBT trained navigators to help folks to navigate MNsure, to identify plans that are good. You do not have to be affected by HIV/AIDS to use them, and you can access them through our website as well. Medicare is now covering. What didn't happen, what we sort of hoped that they would do is just kind of do a big blanket national announcement, here's what's going to happen. They didn't do that as it's done on a case-by-case basis, but the coverage is absolutely there. So there had been an exclusion going back to the 80s, and that got nailed about 3 or 4 years ago. So there's actually a fair amount of progress. I want to flag a couple things, because I think your questions and Sherry's as well kind of touch on something. We're having a lot of success on what these sort of first generation barriers look like. It's anything related to transition, no way, no how. A lot of those are going away, but you're starting to see insurers playing around from there and saying, well, okay, sure we cover this stuff, but only on Tuesdays. And if they come up with these requirements, or you got to do all this stuff, you got to jump through hoops and so on. They're fighting like hell on things like facial feminization surgeries and other kinds of things that hair removal. I mean, anything that they can kind of construe as looking cosmetic, they're going to fight like hell on those, because now they're getting the point from lots of different ways that, oh yeah, we got to cover this stuff, but we really don't want to cover it if we don't have to. So they're coming up with ways of still trying to throw sand in the gears and slow things down. And so again, you may still run into these kind of second generation kinds of questions. If you are working with a trans kid, and by kid I mean someone who's under 18, that is a wild west of insurance right now. It's anyone's guess. There's a lot of stuff that just is not covered. A lot of plans are written as being you have to be 18. We worked with a family who the parent worked at Target, and the parent was fine as far as, but it was a kid who needed some services. And the plan wasn't written super well. We read it as you can't have surgery until you're 18, which we don't like, but this kid wasn't anywhere close to being 18. They read it, and it was Baby United Health, which was the third-party administrator, read it as you don't get anything until you're 18. And they just weren't willing to back down on that stuff. So eventually, because it's a self-insured plan, we knew people at Target. We said, we want to talk with you. Is this what you want to do to your employees' kid? Help us out. Because we know people with families. WCCO, right across the street from your headquarters. Let us know. And it wasn't quite like that. We knew people that were like, no, we don't want that to happen. Let's figure this out. And so they said, no, this is a self-insured plan. And I don't know what, in Excel's situation, hypothetically, Excel employees or others could have gone to Excel and maybe you tried this. I'm certainly not trying to minimize anything that happened. Employees could go. There's a woman that some of us may know who works at Delta. I mean, that woman was just bird dog in Delta for, 100 years to remove their exclusion. And by God, she died. She did. And they're now covering this stuff. So you can always persuade a self-insured employer because it's their own restriction. They may have, Medica may have said, here's a plan. What do you think? Great. But you're the customer. If you say to Medica, we want our money to be used for covering this stuff, Medica's going to say, okay. Otherwise, they're going to lose you as a client. Right. Yeah. So there's lots of different possibilities. But around kids, it's just, oh my goodness. And then the last thing, because I'm keeping an eye on time, I've gone way over what you ever wanted me to talk about. Bless your heart. Is there are trans people who are in institutions. And by institutions, what I mean are potentially nursing homes, where things get really ugly. But I'm really talking about things like prison, where good luck trying to get any kind of care around this for you in the DOC. Minnesota Security Hospital, which is a facility run by the Minnesota Department of Human Services down in St. Peter, is for people who are mentally ill and dangerous, typically. And some of the folks who are there are trained. And good luck in getting respectful care, respectful treatment, or care at a facility like that. And perhaps, the one that makes a lot of people ill is the sex offender program, the infamous Minnesota sex offender program. There is a clutch of trans people who identify as trans women in the sex offender program. They tend to look like this because they can't really do much else. And they are screwed. That's another legal thing, but there you go. Folks in those circumstances, God love you. It's awful. We're working on it. But it is awful. So, the progress that we've made on the outside, and we have made some, there are still challenges ahead, but there are a lot more opportunities than there were 10 years ago. But there's still some ways to go. So, anyway, I'm going to stop there, because you banked on 45 minutes and going here on 15, but there you go.
We ran along to the question.
Right, and that's fine. I mean, because if you just sit there stoning like, oh my God, is he ever going to stop? I want to go to Milk Jam. Then it would have been, Milk Jam is an ice cream place. It's like way over there. Have you been? I know. My father gave me a gift card. I thought, last thing I did was. I know I've covered a lot of stuff, and someone's like, oh my God. But it's all on our website. And our goal is to make this a useful resource so that I think I've seen a couple people like, well, I'm like, oh, yeah, there is. Are there things that you wanted me to touch on in the last couple of minutes that we have here? Yeah.
I just have one question. If you are a government employee, but not federal, and you're stating yourself, I'm looked on the CDL, what they will cover. It's very, it's that second generation thing, and they're playing around with cosmetology. They are, and they really want something even more, how can you say that? Cleanly defined letter from your physicians about in surgery, and they, from what I've seen, if you want to take top surgery, it's really hard. No, but,
Who's administering? Because it's not in the state. So is it Blue Cross or is it?
what the state does, it goes through Department of Administration, CBO, State Employee Group Insurance, self-insured, basically.
But they hire somebody to run it.
Well, yeah, and there are about three different ones. You can have health partners, you can have Blue Cross, and mine, and it's a new one, and I hardly ever use it. So, for other than for gender-related therapy, but so there are three, and the guy at Blue Cross, there was one guy who said, the key is, I've helped people with that, it is getting the right wording behind the term medically necessary.
Somebody named Dan.
Yes. Yeah, and
Dan doesn't return phone calls from Minnesota.
I know. These are designated route, or for Blue Cross Blue Shield. Now for wish I could remember. I just don't use my card.
Let's talk offline because that's something to dig into. Because I think certainly for the next we have at least 10 months, we've got a good administration, and I think there's some very receptive people over at NMB who would be willing to take a look at this. So let's talk offline. But your question reminds me that there is an additional wrinkle on your question about the self-insured plans and all that kind of stuff. The federal law that says self-insured plans are subject to federal law, not state, doesn't apply to state and local governments. So if you work for a school district, if you work for a city, if you work for a county, and you have that sort of a plan, we don't have to worry about Title VII. We can do to them what we do to the University of Minnesota. We can go under state law and get it. All of this is, of course, predicated. It sounds like you were, I don't want to say brave, but there are a lot of people who do not even want to think about the idea of filing a complaint against the people who sign their paychecks. And that's hard. So hats off to you for doing that. Some people will. A lot of people are afraid. They like put their heads down, deal with it. I gotta get that paycheck. So something to think about.
Or even no. Because I mean, I filed against Blue Cross for a couple of years, and then I realized that, it's self-insured. Just go talk to the benefit structure and fix it in about 5 minutes.
Yeah, so I mean, that is a very important tool that's there. And I'm very sensitive to the fact that HRC has got a reputation. But one of their tools, the Corporate Quality Index, has been very useful in terms of raising the bar for corporate America on a lot of things. I mean, we used it so often in terms of domestic partner benefits back 10, 15 years ago. That decision's where that issue pretty much gone away at this point. But now the Corporate Quality Index is a tool that can be used and is being used to slowly raise the bar in terms of making sure that some of this stuff, these issues are being addressed better. Is it perfect?
That was Eric instead for XL Energy. For years, he tried CBI results. We did 100%. Yet they still were resistant. So it is basically a dual effort. The EEOC complaint and selling it via the CBI and improvement simultaneously. So they were able to grab hold of the CBI and look at where we are or preferred employer or somebody else. How we make this EEOC complaint go away.
Right. And there's certainly a benefit if it goes away before the EEOC comes up with a determination. Because once they come up with a determination, they got to go through all this rapid post things and no one likes to do that. So we've seen folks back down. So anyway, yeah, there's lots of work that can be done, is being done, has been done.
Yeah, if anyone is interested in basically our company LGBT group put together a position paper, so to speak, to convince our company to adopt gender assignment surgery. So if anyone is interested in that whole strategy.
It's very good, and you raised the idea of sort of the LGBT employee group, a very good set of allies there, and there's also an organization here called Forum, which is the Twin Cities LGBT Chamber of Commerce. I share an office with Rebecca Wagner, who I used to work with in our project, now she's the PD over there, and that forum would also be very good to be able to say, oh, you should talk to the LGBT group, and the folks at Best Buy just did that, here, let's go do it. So yeah, there's ways to network with those kinds of folks as well. Any last questions, thoughts? I hope this is, there's lots out there. If you poke around on this thing and say, wait a second, you should have this on here. It's pretty easy. And we can get something added if that's useful. So the main takeaway is there's a lot more hope in this area than there was not that long ago. Is every problem done? No, but there's a lot more that we can do these days than we could even that long. So thank you for all that you do in your lives to make the world a better place for yourselves and others, and carry on the good work. So thanks for having me here tonight. Appreciate it.
That's really necessary.
Why did you say that? No, never.
I'm waiting for you.
Thank you. Right. Well, and now, okay, I'll come back here one more time. Oh, yeah, and this person's the same thing. You know, this is outrun.org. Yeah, if you give your card. So that should do it, but yeah, it's outrun.org.
So you trade your info or
I think, yeah, we're all going.